have as the traditional custodians of the lands and waters on which we'll meet today. So we'll move right to the roll call. There is a attendance sheet going around. Please make sure you do sign it. There's no approval of the agenda because once the agenda is sent out for the special council meetings, it is final. That being said, the third point on the agenda is CEO report. Unfortunately, the CEO cannot make it as well. If there are any questions, you forward them to Caitlin or to the CEO directly. Or if there's anything that you want to discuss specifically or bring to council's attention, you can do so now as well. Do you have something to bring up? Okay. Alright, so if there's nothing for CEO's report, we will then move on to food system.
That's mine.
Alright, Rowan, go ahead.
I move to table indefinitely.
Okay, Ali seconds. Is there any discussion on tabling the food systems referendum question indefinitely? Everyone annex renovating?
Yeah.
Veronica, go ahead.
Yeah. Be it resolved that the following questions to the general elections as a referendum question. Do you support the CSU expanding and improving student spaces for clubs on campus?
Second, Julia seconds. Your motivation.
Yeah, so the current spaces are very lacking. This is just kind of the first question mandating the CSU to start exploring new solutions.
Alright, any discussions on this point? Everyone for, please raise your cards. Thank you. Everyone against? Any abstentions? Okay, so we'll move on to the sixth point, which is Library Services Fund. Asma, go ahead.
Yeah, so the Library Service Fund question already came up where the committee, policy committee was sent the question to approve a fee levy for the last 10 years, well, for the last 9 years, and including the next year, we will be putting in $1 per credit for every student who's been taking on the or credit at Concordia, going towards this fund, which gives services back in terms of computer loans, tablets to book, 24-hour, that gives, without any cost, that gives us like tablets to book, study rooms, that allows us access to Concordia services 24/7, which without this fee levy we wouldn't be able to have these services open. There's also improving air quality at Concordia with the new plan system that has been introduced, so we're going to have that. Well, it's already been in place, it just needs to be installed, so all these services are covered with this. The contract is has been reaching its conclusions.
Okay, I'll read the question as it's drafted currently. It says, it reads, do you agree to contribute $1 per credit through the CSU for the Library Services Fund for the next 10 years? Being 2019 to 2029, in order to maintain and increase existing services funded through the Library Service Fund. The contribution will be collected in accordance with the university's tuition and refund policy. Julia?
Second.
Is there a motion?
Yeah, no, that wasn't a motion, that was just the question, so you would move to,
Yeah.
do you want to make the motion?
Yeah.
So,
I just want to provide some clarification. I've sent some documents with a bit of preamble to give some context as well. I don't know if Caitlin got a chance to forward it to you.
There was a description, the annual report, and the draft question and about.
Okay, so no. So there was a forward that I just sent to Caitlin, like
No.
today. No. Okay.
So motion to approve the question and send it to referendum?
Okay, so does everyone understand the motion, which is pretty much approves this question to be put forward to the student body during the general election? Can I have a second? Rowan seconds. Any discussions? Or would you like to provide your motivation?
I can forward that to the committee with the actual amendment and the question is.
Great information.
Yep.
Folks know. I don't know if it makes a difference in terms of voting onto the question.
I don't think so.
Alright, guys, so we'll have Rowan, Awatif, and Veronica. Rowan, go ahead.
For the sake of like giving information to put at the polling booth, if that's what you're asking. Yeah, like you can have a set of information put separate. Putting it attached to the question, I'm not sure, but I know you can talk to the CEO, they can talk to the CEO and have like something put in as extra information for voters.
What?
Yeah, so just clarify, is this something that's gonna be added at the beginning of the question, or is this something that's
Yeah,
gonna be
just-
like separate next to the
Just
question?
before, so the same way that the other fee levies do generally, they provide a bit of context before they give a question. There's a small paragraph of context that's given.
Veronica?
From my understanding, that could be added later on, because it's more of a description. Our role is to approve the question itself that will be asked, right? So that's what is like, the most important part, because that is what will stand.
Okay, thanks.
Any other discussion on the Library Services Fund? Everyone for, please raise your card. Thank you. Anyone against? Please raise your cards. And any abstentions? Thank you. So the next point is two-round electoral system.
That's me.
Yeah.
Whereas no electoral system is mandated on council choosing candidate to fill a vacant executive seat, whereas a vacant executive seat might have more than two competing candidates, whereas first past the post electoral system can vote in candidates with simple majorities. A simple majority is a majority which the highest number of voters cast for any one candidate exceeds the second highest number, while not constituting an absolute majority of 50% plus one, whereas an absolute majority of more than 50% is required to vote in a new executive, whereas a two-round system eliminates all candidates but the two with the highest number of votes for a second round, whereas a two-round system ensures that the candidate chosen has an absolute majority of the votes, whereas CSU Council of the 2017-2018 fiscal year has adopted the following motion: be it resolved that Council use a two-round system when voting on vacant executive positions. Be it resolved that the following motion be on the ballot in the 2018 CSU general election. Do you, as a CSU member, agree with adding bylaw 7.3.2 such that the Concordia Student Union Council establish an internal two-round electoral system when voting on vacant executive seats?
Can I have a second? Eleanor seconds. Your motivation?
Basically, we had agreed on, like, we voted on this before, but for it to be on the bylaws, we need to put it to question, so that's it.
Thank you. Any discussions? Everyone for, please raise your cards. Thank you. Anyone against? Please raise your card. And any abstentions? Thank you. Is there any more discussion for the two-round electoral system? Okay, so the 8th point is co-op bookstore.
Okay, so the co-op bookstore, do you want me to read the question?
Yeah.
Okay. The Concordia Community Solidarity Co-op Bookstore is a viable alternative. No, sorry, that's the preamble. Do you agree to increase the fee levy of the Concordia Community Solidarity Co-op Bookstore by 5 cents per credit for a total of 14 credit per credit effective fall 2018? And this was approved at Policy Committee 2.
Okay. Do you want to make the motion to have this question sent to the election?
I motion to send this question to the upcoming election.
Okay, can I have a second? Elective seconds. Your motivation?
We looked at all the documents. They're an existing fee levy. They just want to modify their fee levy and increase it. There's nothing untoward, and we're happy to support them on that.
All right, any discussions? Yeah, Peter?
Yes, just have a question. So, also for clarification, like, do you want to send this as a separate thing, or like put this, or like with the election? Because like I'm just not really see how it will connect to election though. So just have a quick question on this.
Sorry, the question
Like, do you want it to put this aside as like in the referendum question
That's what it is, yeah.
with other federal groups?
All right, any other questions or discussion? Okay, everyone for, please raise your cards. Anyone against, please raise your cards. And any abstentions? Okay, thank you.
And could I get mine noted?
Yes. All right, so the next point on the agenda is number 9, refugee sponsorship program. Rowan,
I move to table until the next council meeting, or next regular council meeting.
Julia seconds. Your motivation?
You asked me to.
Okay, all right. So,
You can, yeah.
okay, so we will break Robert's Rules of Order just very quickly. I was not initially supposed to be chairing, so I would have presented this point. And I would have made the same motion because we don't have the full information, and seeing as though there is a regular council meeting next week, we could discuss it then at length with the full information. So, now I'm back to chairing. Julia seconded the motion. Is there any discussion? What if you had a point? Okay. Everyone for, please raise your cards.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. Thank you. Everyone against, please raise your card. And any abstentions?
I'm sorry, Omar, which, this is a refugee sponsor?
It's a refugee sponsorship program.
Okay, cool.
Okay, there's nothing else on the agenda, but I do understand that you're from Space Concordia. I do see the documents as well, but it's not on the agenda, so let me just... if council is okay with that, we will add this point or take into consideration that the documents were sent out, so that may have been a mistake on the agenda itself. So, that being said, we'll make number 10 Space Concordia, and... Sorry, and go ahead.
I believe you have to present the question. Do you want me to read the question first?
Okay, so the question is, do you agree to a fee levy for Space Concordia of 16 cents per credit effective summer 2018?
That wasn't...
No, I was just reading the question.
Right, so,
for
I
the fee
mean,
levy.
yeah, that's why I said you can't second because it wasn't a motion. But you, okay, so she, Asma will move to have that question sent to the general election. Eleanor seconds. Asma, your motivation?
I think Space Concordia can speak for themselves. They're
Yeah,
here
no
tonight.
problem, go ahead.
Yeah, so I could just, I'm not sure if you guys have read the documents or anything, but basically, I could give a brief summary of why we're asking for this to move to a fee levy as opposed to staying within the ECA. So we've done, we basically formed as a society under the ECA, which is, I don't know if you guys know what the ECA is. And we were originally only participating in engineering student competitions. However, over time, our scope kind of expanded. So originally, we were working on a satellite student competition, and then we included as well different engineering competitions. So that was still within kind of the scope of the ECA. But more recently, and like kind of over time, we've started including students who, or projects which are outside of the scope of just engineering. So as an example, we have some students from arts and sciences who are participating in our projects. And we also are participating in grants for research grants that the Canadian Space Agency is allocating alongside other kind of research grants and our kind of outreach initiatives, as well as just overall kind of expanding beyond just our engineering competitions. So for these reasons, and in particular the fact that as a member of the ECA, basically, like under that status, we're not allowed to include students who are outside of ENCS. So that restricts us a lot because we need students from arts and sciences. We as well, students in terms of our dealings with businesses and stuff. It's really beneficial for us to include students from JMSB as well as other students from across Concordia. And I can go, I'm not sure how much in detail, I guess I could answer you guys' questions if you have them, but I'd be happy to basically explain why and in what ways our scope is expanding beyond just the engineering, expanding beyond ENCS, and basically for those reasons, as well as some others, were basically asking, we wanted to add our question on the referendum of becoming a general fee levy group outside of just the ENCS.
Thank you. Any questions? Amy? Yep.
Do you mind repeating the question again? Sorry, because I don't have.
Yep.
Do you agree to a fee levy for Space Concordia of 16 cents per credit effective summer 2018?
All right, Amy, go ahead.
Before I go, can I ask like two questions, one clarifying and then one actually
Yeah.
substantive? Yikes. So first question, just a little unclear. What's your like position with the ENCS or not the ENCS with Space Concordia?
Yeah, right. So right now, basically, we exist as a student group that's under the ECA, which is the Engineering Computer Science Association. So we exist alongside a bunch of other engineering student groups. So like groups such as SAE, and as well as other groups that can participate exclusively in engineering competitions.
I actually just meant like personally, like what position or in what capacity are you representing? Like,
So I'm representing Space Concordia in my capacity as president of that
Okay.
association.
And then second, I believe that the policy committee had already reached out about this, but there was a concern about Space Concordia's conflict resolution policy.
Right.
And I know that you guys sent like further docs clarifying that, but just I guess for the benefit of the room, if you could like elaborate on what the policy is, how it fits with like just like the best practice of complaints policies in general.
Right, yeah, I'd be very happy to. So yeah, we basically, as you mentioned, basically we originally sent to the policy committee a first version of our constitution that we were going to ask the question on, as well as our procedures, or our policies rather, for complaints. And we got back some feedback that we should probably expand and make it more explicit and make sure that we'd basically be more accountable to the student body. So taking that into consideration, we basically modified our constitution that we ran on, and we included a complaint committee inside of our kind of framework. So that complaint committee basically includes a majority of members from CSU, I believe, student at large members, as well as a member representing the CSU, alongside representation from inside Space Concordia. So this committee has the authority to basically resolve complaints or things that might basically any student who issues a complaint to the society has it originally. There's the VP internal, which is an executive under this association, tries to resolve it, but that student has a right to basically escalate their complaint, and that right is in the Constitution towards this committee. And so this committee will basically be able to make decisions, including and it's not just like a rubber stamp. Like it has the ability to actually remove a member, including an elected executive or representative from the society, if the committee deems that that's necessary. And overall, we also adjusted our policies. So in our policies, we included more of a kind of more thorough or more. I think we basically fleshed out the procedure to make sure that it was very clear every step of the way what the procedure for the complaints were, and trying to make sure that external complaints, any kind of like legal liability, would have a clear traceability and a clear paper trail. In particular, the whole thing is in the policies and in the Constitution is documented, and again, it's not just like a kind of internal documentation. Like complainants have the right to ask for the documentation relating to their complaint, basically we basically tried to modify it, and I believe those documents should be available for you all to read if you choose, to try to accommodate and try to make sure that the liability and the accountability are sufficiently kind of managed.
Thank you. Eleanor, and then Awatif?
No, I was disappointed that he answered it.
Okay, sorry. And then,
I thought it was happening.
okay, sorry, go ahead.
So I have two questions. First, fee levies are traditionally supposed to be a service for for the entire student body. How do you justify Space Concordia being such a service? So for example, we have the People's Potato that like everybody uses. And as an ECA club right now, if it passes to become a fee levy, will Space Concordia continue getting funding from ECA?
Alright, so I'll answer your second question because it's a quick answer. No. So basically, and we've discussed this with ECA, we both agreed that, or we came up with a procedure for if we run on this and it passes, then we're no longer going to be receiving funding from the ECA. So we'll be entirely, our funding will be coming from the fee levy. As to your first question regarding services and like kind of what service Space Concordia provides, that's something we thought about a lot. basically, like, we kind of reached out to some of the other fee levy groups and saw what the scope was of kind of what a fee levy group could be under Concordia. And we basically, the way that we are kind of understand it through, the way that we would propose it through, and the way that we think it could happen is that we basically provide a sense of, like, we basically would be, and we embedded it, part of that in the question, but Space Concordia, through its funding, would basically allow students to participate in the space community of Canada. The space sector is emerging in Canada, basically as like, especially in recent years, there's been a lot of kind of excitement generated, but not just that, a lot of movement has happened in terms of not only the CSA, like the public sector, but also industry and kind of like organization and like law and like a lot of different, it's basically an emerging industry or an emerging sector. And we have been kind of participating in that in a sense of originally we went to these competitions, but we also went on to actually, we have some like contacts at the Canadian Space Agency that we work with, and we kind of started participating more and more in this sector. So to answer your question, basically the service that we think that we would be providing would be not only like the actual like launch of a satellite and like installation of a ground station here at Concordia, but connecting kind of some of the research aspects of Concordia to this space sector that I've described. And on top of that, kind of being a conduit within which, and a framework within which Concordia and Concordia students can participate in that and have like some kind of stake in that.
Thank you. Yeah.
So, like, as a philosophy student, how can I use your service as Space Concordia? Like, where would I be able to contribute or take advantage of this fee levy?
Right. So basically, as a philosophy student, you, in terms of like participation, we are, one of the things that Canada is grappling with right now is space law. So kind of we have had some kind of conversations about space law, but we have some interest in developing more of a program for that as part of, like, as within the framework of this constitution, as like a kind of committee and something that would be able to interface with the various like kind of organs of that around Canada. So that would be the initial thing I would think of, is like kind of a voice in that emerging area, and maybe like a kind of a place in the kind of space law framework of Canada, which is being established right now. Aside from that, I would basically say that Space Concordia kind of would offer all students, it would basically provide many students with a place within it. Sorry, I'm just trying to formulate my answer.
If I can
Yeah.
add
Me
on.
out here.
So, first of all, I'm completely biased, complete conflict of interest. I was part of the team not so long ago, so I will not vote or anything. Just want to provide more information, maybe. I think what Mark is trying to say is Space Concordia is not just only like specific technical teams, it wants to be much more, right? It's more of a passion-based group. So if you're a philosophy student that's not interested in space, it's like if you love meat. People's Potatoes got nothing to offer. If you want to know more about space, if you want to get involved, then we provide a platform for any opportunity. And if you come with a good idea and the motivation and the passion, there's going to be people that are as passionate as you that are going to help you bring your ideas to life. So, yeah.
Thank you. Awate?
Yeah.
And then
I'm just gonna. You done?
No, sorry. I think Mark.
Sorry, I could just follow up with one. Thank you, Ali. Yeah, I think that she kind of put in some words. Like, basically, we would basically be a place where, and kind of again, like a framework where you could go if you had an idea or you wanted to do something about philosophy in space. We would be like somewhere, like a central place that you could come to and like propose, like, hey, I have an idea for a project. I want to discuss, what are the ramifications of like colonizing outer worlds or something. And Space Concordia under this, or what are the any kind of project or something like that you could come up with, we would be the place where you could come to and have that not only work on that, but also have that actually be heard within the space community in Canada, and have connections to be able to apply that
Thank you.
and bring that into the greater community.
What?
Are we all done? Sorry.
Sorry.
So just go back to the complaints policies. So just to clarify, you said that there is going to be a committee that deals with complaints, because in the papers that I have that was submitted to policy committee, it's not added there. Or is it? Yeah. Okay. So let's just switch this off. So there's going to be a committee where there's going to be student at large that the executive is going to choose. And there's going to be an executive from the team to sit in that committee, and then there's going to be a representative from CSU.
Yes, so, sorry, let me, maybe I could just,
Yeah, because I want to clarify that
so
before
it's absolutely
I
established. So,
comment on
we would basically have a,
Section 9.
Section 9, yeah. Well, we would have a permanent committee for, hold on. Well, because I want to discuss the permanent committee for dispute resolution, maybe, which is the actual structure for it. So basically, it would be chaired by an executive of Space Concordia, and it would consist of a temporarily appointed member from Space Concordia, as well as a member of the CSU Council of Representatives, and 2 students at large from the CSU. So the structure would basically be such that the students who are not part of Space Concordia would have a voting majority on it. And that would be the kind of check and balance that we established.
So I have a huge problem
Sure.
with that structure. First, when you chair, when you give an executive from your team the power to chair that committee, how do you make sure that the complaint that's coming is not against that person that's chairing? And complaints needs to be anonymous, like the people that students are complaining about do not need to know beforehand until the complaint is solved or like a resolution is reached. That's one. Appointed member, that means the executive team is going to appoint that member. That means you do have the power to choose who you're going to put in that committee. Student at large from CSU, do you mean student at large that you're going to appoint from undergraduate students, or CSU is going to appoint student at large?
Okay, so basically, so I'll just try to answer that in order. Basically, the in regards to like some kind of conflict of interest, or like let's say like the executive or the one that would be the target of the complaint, for instance. So this committee is basically called when there are some complaints that need to be resolved, and that whenever there's a complaint that needs to be resolved, the actual Council of Space Concordia would meet first and appoint that member who's going to serve on it. So the idea would be to appoint someone who, according to without the full nature of the complaint, but appoint someone who would be impartial. So I take your concern about the possibility, like the kind of inherent nature of the chair being someone who has a lot of authority, or informal authority in that case, aside from just the formal voting authority. So what we could do perhaps is have the committee actually be chaired by someone appointed by the CSU executive. So regarding the students at large, etc., those would be basically someone that we would try to get appointed at the start of the year, and we would basically come to the CSU and ask for some members, student at larges, to be appointed to serve on our committee.
So the CSU appoints them, or you appoint them?
The CSU would appoint them.
Can I have a right of reply?
It's your second one and last.
As far as I understood, the composition of council, there's going to be executives sitting on it, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so when executives are sitting on it, and then the complaints come, and then the complaints is opened to everybody that's sitting at council, and executives get to know.
Council committee.
Council committee?
No, council is different. And committee
But
is
he
different
said,
than
no, he
documents.
said about the chair. Council is gonna appoint a chair that's an executive to sit on the dispute resolution committee. So how do you make sure that the executive do not know that complaint? That's one. And second, I had something to say, but I forgot.
Okay, we'll come back to you.
Yep.
Okay, so there's Peter and then Rowan. Did you want to be on it? Okay. Sorry. Okay. So sorry, just
Yeah, sorry.
you'll answer the question. We'll go to Peter, Rowan, and then Eleanor because they haven't spoken yet. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so to answer your first question, we basically in the writing of the Constitution, basically it's the privacy of the complaint is guaranteed to within the committee. So the council, the way that the council would appoint someone who it deems, the Council of Space Concordia would appoint someone who it deems to be have no conflict of interest would be that the complainant's name would basically be, it's like, oh, okay, this person has a complaint, and we basically would appoint someone who, from some member that would not be related to, or is not basically named in the complaint. So in the complaint, you can name kind of some different people. The details would be withheld, but the council would try to pick someone who's not related to that.
Peter.
Okay, so basically I have two questions. First of all, because I know that free levy group is more for the Concordia student. So if you guys become free levy group, let's say, are you guys able to do more stuff that like towards school? Because I feel like right now what's for you guys is more of a launch like outside of like competition outside of school. So is there any way you guys can do something that are like more school related stuff so that way other people can know about this? And second question, if it's not an assigned student, for example, like a fine art student, how are we able to contribute? Because I feel like right now, fine art, like it wouldn't be able to really contribute to you guys because it's more of an engineer thing and more of other program thing. So how are we able to like contribute ourselves to you guys?
Right. So if I understand the question, basically in regards to like, given that we work basically on engineering, larger engineering projects right now. One example would be like right now we with some professors at Concordia submitted a proposal for a grant. It's like a pretty big grant to fly and launch a satellite. So this grant is one way in which it would not just be constrained to the engineering projects themselves, like it's something outside of that competition framework. As to like students being outside of engineering and like how they could kind of participate, it would be through if not one of the kind of existing projects that we have. Again, we would kind of be a place where people can come and propose projects and like kind of again, I mentioned like kind of space law, other kind of projects that people might want to work on that have to do with space that would maybe need access to like the actual Canadian Space Agency or other kind of players or different like factors in the Canadian kind of space industry or this Canadian space community. We would try to be the link to that. So for anyone who's, no matter what department you're in, if you want to kind of have some way of connecting with that, then you could come to us and kind of work on a project under us that would give them the resources to make those connections. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but.
Okay, so we'll go to Rowan, Eleanor, and then Sophie.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got several things I want to ask about, but since we're on the topic of the complaints, or we kind of dove into the topic of complaints policy, I just want to make clear, like, there's a lot in this complaints policy that's kind of bouncing back, like, we'll take it to the CSU, we'll have the CSU appoint people, like, we'll have the executive, etc. Like, as an accredited fee levy group, which Space Concordia would become, would this question pass, like, they're not under the CSU. Technically, they have absolutely no relationship with the CSU. And, like, it's not normal within fee levy groups. In my year and some months on council, I've never seen us, like, appoint someone to sit on any sort of board, like, any sort of complaints board for a fee levy group. And I think that's kind of, like, not really our place as, like, both from a, that's not something that the CSU is responsible for, and also from a, like, the CSU can't necessarily promise that that should go well. And I think especially doing like an at-large appointment, like these kinds of things should have people that have training and have some sort of idea on how to do these things. And so I think that's kind of a flaw within the complaints policy as I see it.
Could I directly answer, please?
Okay, yeah, if you would,
Yeah.
actually, is there a question or it's just a comment?
I mean, it wasn't
Was no question?
It was
Okay.
an open question, but I guess I'll.
Alright, well,
Like-
he's clarifying
I
that
mean-
there was no question, so I'll put
sorry.
you on the speakers list and you'll be able to speak. Sophie, go ahead.
Wait, what? I wasn't.
Oh, sorry, you're on the speakers list anyways, yeah.
Okay, then,
No.
Yeah,
go
okay.
ahead.
I just want to explain a bit of context about the whole
That's
complaints
okay.
policy because it seems to be like a very fuzzy subject. We originally had something that was kept internal because we thought it was enough, right? This is the way we functioned so far, and it worked well because the complaints were handled internally, and we thought it was fine. And it came out through the policy committee that, oh no, it can happen that someone will have a complaint that will address to the whole Space Concordia executive body, therefore it cannot be handled internally. This happened a little last minute, and we're trying to find a solution, and we might not be the best people to figure this out. We try to like figure out something and think of something that could work, which is why we came up with the whole CSU idea. I was part of the people writing this constitution and everything. I'm pretty sure Space Concordia is open to any suggestion. It's not if you guys want to like provide suggestion how to make the policy, like the complaints policy thing work, we are more than welcome. We want this to work more than anything else. And it's true that we try to find solution that would satisfy the most people and make this able to proceed and make this as bulletproof as possible, but we're not geniuses in policies, right? So, I mean, if you have any suggestion, I think that'd be super appreciated. The way we try to make it is to not keep it as internal as it was before, and it has been brought to our attention that we could actually rely on the CSU to appoint people for us, which would make this committee more unbiased, which is why we did this. But, yeah.
Okay. Sophie, Awatif, Asma.
Yeah, so basically, I am a little uncomfortable with the complainant's name being given to anyone in the committee, just because, like, that creates a situation where you sort of out someone who's coming up with a potentially, like, harassment or tricky situation. Like, a suggestion, maybe, I also noticed that there's, not to my knowledge, any like consent training or sensitivity training given to executives of Space Concordia that could help maybe create a little bit of a safer dynamic within the executive and a sort of an awareness of power dynamics that are at play when there are complaints of a sensitive nature. That could be something that would be added just as like a helpful tip. And yeah, maybe just, I think it's really important that the complaint process is done in a way that the people coming forward feel comfortable and safe, and not necessarily like they're going to be outed to a committee right away when the committee's being chosen. I think that's like a little bit of a sticky situation where you get people who might not feel comfortable to come forward in that case, which is, I was one of the people who voiced a concern about keeping it internal on policy committee. So I think it's really important that like when dealing with something that can be super sensitive, it's a well-rounded approach. I'm just also a little confused as with Rowan, like how the CSU's role will really work in that capacity.
Is that a question? Sorry.
Yeah, is that, can you rephrase if there's a question?
Sure, would you be open to considering a mandatory consent training for the executive and
Yeah.
keeping the complainant's names?
So yes, absolutely.
Confidential.
I probably would reiterate Ali's point that this was something that we tried to come up with, basically to address some of those concerns that we heard. We're absolutely open to having mandatory sensitivity training, and as well as like about the names being kind of included. That was kind of a function of us trying to come up with a solution to have someone who would not be in conflict serving on this committee. We looked around a bit regarding like what other kind of complaint committees or any kind of like mechanism like this existed on other fee levy groups, and we weren't able to find much in terms of like something concrete like this. So we're 100% open to any kind of changes like that, especially as Eleanor said, this is kind of we've written some documents, but when it comes to writing something very comprehensive like this, we're like kind of trying this out. So perhaps I guess maybe I'm not sure if regarding Robert's rules, if I can just like kind of ask this like this, but if we were to go back and maybe modify some of the mechanisms of the complaints committee, and like in particular about the privacy in front of the main council, as well as mandatory sensitivity training, would that be within the time scale needed for the campaign? Because I know it starts on the 13th.
So as for the bylaws, to have a question brought to, a referendum question brought to election, there's a list of things that have to be submitted and approved by policy committee, as if those will be the operating procedures and the fee levy will operate by. So from my understanding, no, unless someone else feels otherwise. Yeah.
A quick answer to this. As Mark mentioned, we have actually gone through most of the other fee levies in their complaints policy, and we have yet to find a fee levy within Concordia that has actually thorough complaints policy. I might be wrong. I'm probably wrong.
Thank you. We do have a speakers list, so it's Awatif, Asma, Veronica, and Julia.
Yeah, let me just answer that first. Actually, I'm one of the ones, as well as Sophie, that raised concerns about the complaints policy, and I did tell Asma that QPERC has, in my point of view, a very good composition of a complaints committee that you guys can use. And what they do there is that they people that sit in the committee get elected in the General Assembly, and they're just student at large that get elected. Executives have nothing to do with them, and all the complaints, they don't go to the board, they don't go to the executives, they go straight to the people that sit in the committee. So there's that. Again, I'm also uncomfortable with the fact that please correct me if I'm wrong, because I might be looking at the old version of the policy. When the complaint is received, it goes to the VP internal, right? I mean, like if it goes to the VP internal, the VP internal would know exactly who is it that's complaining, what's the complaint, and be able to tell the rest of the executives. So that's also another problem that I find. And I'd like clarification. So if we vote Space Concordia to go to referendum, we're voting every single document with it, right?
Point of information.
Yeah.
Is it possible to vote to send a question to referendum in the condition that policies are reviewed and approved by the CSU?
But leave that up to council to decide, because that's the interpretation of the bylaws. Ideally would be up to JB to make that call for the interpretation of the bylaws. So I can't answer that right now. Sorry. Asma?
Yeah, just to address some of the concerns around the room. This was, I understand not everyone has a copy of the policy minutes, and these were forwarded, and I think they missed out from being sent to the new chair right now. The concerns were raised, and Eleanor will remember that we sat through for good over 2 hours to work through them to make sure they got in time. And in that process, without trying to impose my views, I did share some good practices that I was aware of and that were shared. QPERC was one of them, and the model that we referred to was the external committee, like for complaints. And the issue that was mentioned was that filling those seats can be very difficult if you don't have members that, just filling in executive seats could be quite difficult. And here are some of the challenges. I said, well, some of the ways in which groups do tend to occupy seat and voice for everyone is sometimes having seats that are representatives. So, for example, you might have a CSU seat on something. It was not a mandatory thing, and I did reiterate that. It wasn't necessarily for CSU to be involved in the recruitment, but it was definitely one of the processes in terms of opening up conversation. There's ways internally that Space Concordia could look into. But I guess initially there was a lot of difficulty in understanding, I think, what was seen as problematic as well within the structure, because you're talking about, a project like, setup, and then we're talking about going to fee levy model and what policies mean, because like I said previously, internal processes worked well for the level of resolutions you needed to revert to. But now we're talking about scaling, right? And the kind of things that could come your way. So my challenge from hearing some of the things that Mark mentioned today and Eleanor as well were that the external process has a lot of internal involvement in a way that it wasn't anticipated when we discussed it. So when we met on Monday, Tuesday, after the conversation that I had from Policy Committee and getting all the concerns on board, it was what we originally discussed was having an external process, not necessarily having an external process where there's still a disproportionate amount of conflict of interest involved for members that are still holding on in some way. So it's different from what you originally submitted, but still not quite, like as people are asking questions and there's more coming out in terms of what it could be, what it couldn't be, those things are a little concerning for me too, so.
Thank you. Veronica?
I would like to motion to refer it back to Policy Committee for further review and maybe further work to help Space Concordia with their conflict or complaint policy.
Okay, so there's currently already a motion on the table to approve the question. So if you would like, if council wants to send it back to Policy Committee, you would have to vote the motion down and then refer it to Policy Committee. So. Yeah, you can call the question, so there's no discussion when there's a motion to call the question, although you're supposed to do that before you speak, but we'll make the exception. Everyone for calling the question, please raise your card. Are you guys up? Okay. Everyone against? Any abstentions? So, the question has been called. I will reread it and just mention also what Veronica said. So the question is, do you agree to a fee levy for Space Concordia of 60 cents per credit total, effective summer 2018, to be sent to the 2018 general election? Veronica suggested to have it sent to Policy Committee, but if that's something that council wants to do, you would have to vote this motion down and then make another motion to have it sent back to Policy Committee. Everyone for this motion, please raise your card. Everyone against? Sorry, so just to clarify, we're voting on the motion itself. If you think it should be referred to Policy Committee, you have to vote the motion down, right? If you think that it's good as it is, you can vote for, however you like. Once the motion has been declined, then you can make a new motion to have it sent to Policy Committee. So everyone for sending the question as is with the attached documents, which includes the complaint policy, please raise your card. Everyone against? Any abstentions? Thank you. So the motion has been declined. Veronica, I'll allow you to introduce the second motion.
Yeah, I would like to motion to refer this back to Policy Committee.
Jared seconds. Oh, sorry, I just didn't see it from my peripheral. That being said, we will go back to the speakers list where I have Julia and Rowan. I will add Eleanor on it now.
So I wanted to say, like, good job for wanting to involve a lot of different people from a lot of faculties. That's really great. I didn't know that you could do stuff in space that had nothing to do with engineering, so kudos. In my experience with fee levies and having been part of a club that became a fee levy 3 years ago, I wanted to reinforce the idea that all of your policies should be survivor focused and for there to be diverse representation in the complaints committee, including cross faculty, but also in terms of like different people and different backgrounds, BIPOC folks, for example, so that if there's an issue in regards to anything that touches on that, you have people who actually experience that who could potentially help out, and it would also allow for more representation, and I think that would ease people a little bit more. I think your complaints committee just needs a little bit more like arranging before it's ready, but overall well done, and hopefully these changes happen so that you can get a fee levy in the future.
Thank you. Rowan?
Oversight.
Eleanor?
I just wanted to mention as just a matter of info that we technically sent our constitution back in December and we heard back last week. I'm not just it's just the facts. So it was really hard for us to adapt, and like it'd be nice if this is pushed back, that to have actual feedback and to be able to work on this rather than have to like submit something without knowing what's gonna happen until 3 days before. Because that actually happened, and it's true that it's like, I agree to send into policy, but I don't want it to be the same thing as before where we don't get any answer for 3 months until the day of, which would be really helpful if you want to make this pass. So yeah, just a quick point.
Thank you.
I didn't mean it to be like,
Alright, there's no one else on the speakers list, so Asma, go ahead.
In regards to time, having members actually provide feedback about, I mean, the documents are accessible, but also having a certain amount of feedback for members to read through and see very concretely is different than like just saying, yeah, we've got all the documents and acknowledging that. So having people comb through and more than once was quite useful. And it was also a little harder to organize meeting up on several issues in the same time, sitting around the room. We ended up having to do it over the internet, as I shared it with you. But there is definitely, definitely having bought it in triaging that in a way that would have prioritized the policies and everything. I guess sitting together and getting everyone primed up on it, we saw things in a way that maybe if we're a little passive, if we're sitting over a room, may not have come up, right? There's a lot of other things that have alerted us as well to power dynamics, because on the surface, the mediation policy that was in place didn't seem too wrong until someone said, hey, what about, look at the setup. There's, we're talking about chair and council that are, it appears to be a non-hierarchical system when you look at council, but then there's a lot of involvement, and these are the implications. So those conversations help look at concerns from a very fresh light. But yeah, I totally appreciate that it was last minute, and as I said in our conversation, which is exactly why I was happy to give time to sit through, because with what we had, that's the best we could do.
So there's no one else on the speakers list, and if there's no more discussion, we'll move it to the vote to send this to policy committee. Everyone for, please raise your cards. Everyone against, please raise your cards. Any abstentions? One, thank you. That being said, there's nothing else on the agenda, and I would request for someone to make a motion to adjourn the meeting. Jaren moved, alright, and Ali seconds. The meeting is adjourned at 8:12.